for coming. Excited to help facilitate the governance call. Because Yaz is one of the co-authors of the CTP that we'll be discussing, CGP 38. I'll be filling in for him, and I guess just a few notes to start off with at the beginning. If you're not talking, just go ahead and put yourself on mute. That way we can reduce background noise. If you raise your hand, I'll try to bring the conversation over to you as soon as possible. And but also just feel free to jump in anywhere you think is you want to make a comment as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Yaz to give an overview of CGP 38. Got it shared here on the screen. I'll kind of scroll through it into the relevant parts that he's talking.
No.
I think somebody is unmuted.
I think I'm gonna people. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Will. Happy to have you facilitating this call. Yeah. So thank you everyone for attending this Celo governance call, where we're going to talk about CGP 38, the Celo ecosystem treasury proposal. So the Celo ecosystem treasury proposal is one of the main objectives is to aggressively position Celo at the forefront of the crypto space. And in order to do that, we identified multiple, like 4 different categories on how to approach this. The idea of like crypto originally started with Satoshi, and it was all about the cypherpunk values of accepting free what we call FOSS, or free open source software, and open source software. And with that, it's all about like, pushing the space forward, allowing people to permissionlessly and in a decentralized way to be part of this ecosystem, and cutting edge financial tools for all, and Web3. So for this proposal, actually, Will, I think there might be, this is the older one. Let me share with you the quick link for the new one. I think it hadn't got merged yet. Hold on. Yeah, so I think if you do just like a hard refresh on CGP 38, it should be here.
Awesome. How does that look?
Yeah, that's better. Okay, so here we identified with feedback from a great discussion on the forum post or feedback. Originally it was like 3 different areas of focus, but we synthesized it with help from the community members and to 4 different areas. The first one that we wanted to target as part of like the governance proposal is open source projects. So the mission here is we want to generate developer interest in Celo at a core level rather than at an application level. So at the core level is improving a lot of things like the EVM, creating new clients, like what we call blockchain clients, allow people to sync the network with Celo. And actually pushing the space forward on everything related to open source, from cryptography to threshold encryption, sponsoring EIPs that we can sponsor, like that we can support on the all-core dev for Ethereum as well, because they might have a lot of value to us on Celo. And even looking at Hyperledger Besu, supporting Geth and stuff. And also decentralized identity research. So Valora is the best proof of concept currently of what we call decentralized identity at some level using foreign identity. And there's a lot of ways we can push that tech forward and stuff using open source research and development. And the target outcome is within 2 years, we want to have at least 50 people attending, the governance call, the all-core dev call, and at least half of those people being non-C-labbers. So what I've seen in the past in the industry, at least from an open source level, is when you try to fund new and cutting edge research, in cryptography and in cryptocurrency and in the blockchain space, even with Ethereum, you're gonna generate a lot of interest from the core developer to come work on your chain because they'll be like, oh, seller's working on X and Y on the core level. Let's go build on that. Or let's go check out that call. Let's see what they're up to. Let's see if maybe we can fork that code, use it on all the other Web3 projects and stuff. And that on its own generates a lot of activity on a core level, which would translate to more new technology introduced on the core level that would improve the experience of the application build, the developers building on top of it. The second category we want to talk about is radical experimentation. So the whole idea of cypherpunk values is to push the space forward in the sense where we can have a lot of access for everyone around the world to use Celo and use Web3 and cryptocurrency and blockchain. At the same time, really look at wildcard, look at different crazy ideas that might work and that might really make people be like, wow, Seller's really working on a lot of cool stuff here. And a lot of the stuff that we can think about is um, like if you look at, for example, like if you think about cryptocurrency as a cash model, where it's like physical cash, but like obviously like with some kind of microchips on it, like Kong.cash, there's a lot of ways we can experiment with that in emerging markets. Um, Folks also mentioned KYC compliant privacy, like zero knowledge snark. So basically, a lot of that would allow us to adopt a lot of things that we're pushing for with the open source aspect, but use it with experiment. Like we're applying the research into different pilot projects and stuff, and really make newsworthy like kind of like experiment that would really bring the community forward and bring more people to be interested in solo using radical experimentations. The third one is global markets and emerging markets. Basically, we want we so if you think about it from a fundamental level, if you look at emerging markets, um, it's hard to bring in people from emerging markets to build on Celo and become an entrepreneur, not because of they can't or anything, but because the conditions to create that are very small. So, an emerging market, you're expecting people to all be speaking English. And then you're expecting them to have a laptop that they can, use. And then you're expecting them to learn like to know that they're the developer, they know programming languages, and of all the programming languages, and you're hoping that they're working on Solidity and that they're deploying their Solidity code on Celo rather than on Ethereum. Then on top of that, you're hoping that they're entrepreneurial minded enough that they would and like that they would want to create a startup out of that and ask for funding. So that is already a really tiny funnel that's very hard to bring in all those folks from emerging markets to come build on Celo. So with this category, what we want to do is we want to create the condition to energize that from like a grassroots level where you can think about it like funding different initiatives around create like with universities where you can create hackathon in their specific languages. You can create a DAO like for each country, like that where there's an ecosystem lead, like Brazil, Nigeria, like you can do even the Philippines and stuff. And with that, you give them a large allocation. You find folks for that DAO in those, and they can determine what that money goes to, right? So that way they become more autonomous and focus on governance on a local level and create governance proposals in their local languages and determine what that money is for. Maybe they'll put like 5% allocation to like a dev shop needing to build an application for Brazil, or like a university in the Philippines needing to do a bootcamp for Web3 and stuff. And the whole idea is, if you look, like universities are very interesting because if you think about it, university students, they have a lot of energy, a lot of ambition and stuff, and if you can really energize them and inspire them on a fundamental level to interact with the technology, like, hey, let's build this simple token game on a test net and share it with your friend, let your friends play around with it, and by definition they hand it off like, hey, look what I built. share it with their friends and stuff, they're all going to be more interested in that technology. They're going to try to understand it more. And if you provide even translation services and stuff to like all the documentation, you really try like really energizing, creating the condition to create those future builders so that in the future they can go to Celo camp, they can go build, they can maybe get a funding from Flory or any other VCs and stuff. And so yeah, that's the category for the global markets. And finally, developing crypto native community around Celo. So what is a crypto native community? I think most of us understand that. And like, is with crypto native, like all the activities we're doing at the core community. So the core community is like the governance call, the all core dev calls and stuff. And um, uh, like all the activities we're doing, having people from outside of C-Lab proposing a CGP and having non-country specific DAOs, so DAOs that are more focused on general community than like a country specific one, and having all these kind of activities, building hackathons, having different projects and stuff. Basically energizing the crypto native community because that is the most core community for any crypto projects. And that was going to that's an important component that's going to push Celo on a global level forward. So I'm going to stop here to have anyone want to add anything. Anyone had a question before we continue forward. So let me just stop here for a second.
Yeah, if it's okay, I definitely have some things to add and give some color to our proposal here. Yeah, these categories are, I think, where we saw that there was 4 areas that could genuinely use quite a bit of, I think invigoration might be a good word for this network. And just to give some color to it, we definitely, even in like the radical experimentation, we've already got a couple candidates that we're looking at for distributing funds to. Projects like Liquid Star are really cool, and they're doing. I encourage anyone to look up Liquid Star, but it's not. It's not. I think siloed to radical experimentation and global markets are 2 separate things. Like there are areas where you can have radical experimentation and be also involved in like global markets. When it comes to crypto core community stuff, we've been talking to folks like Zapper who are really excited to accept a grant and deploy a mobile first wallet with multiple assets across multiple chains, while just using Celo as the background or the foundational layer. And when it comes to yes, Steve Hawk, yeah, I know. I had a meeting with Seb from Zapper about 2 weeks ago, and he wanted to do it holistically through like actual governance type stuff. And when you look at how we have structured the multi-sig, we are kind of putting our money where our mouth is and saying, yeah, let's get as many people as we can who have backgrounds, who need crypto native backgrounds and are outside of not only just C Labs, but outside of the norm of who usually runs a multi-sig. If you look at the people we have, I didn't really mean to, I don't think we really meant to structure it like this, but we actually realized, wow, this is a really diverse set of people and a diverse set of backgrounds. And it could be potentially one of the most diverse multi-sigs that's existed so far. And there's a lot to be said about creating community from like a holistic organic perspective. And when we talk about having these leads in these developing nations or emerging markets that help create these DAOs, there's already many examples of people in the Celo ecosystem who want that. And they all have maybe different outcomes that they are hoping to have. So for instance, there's a group down in Jamaica who I've gotten really close to, and they are super excited to try and create their own Celo DAO, and it's for specifically the purpose of trying to curate a stablecoin that their central bank can use. And they've actually been super helpful with us at understanding the sandbox that is the Caribbean when it comes to stablecoins. And really, they're the best people to create that information, and that shares it with us, shares it with C-Labs, shares it with everyone, and informs the network itself as to how to move forward in these regional areas. Instead of a traditional approach of us going to those regional areas and proposing solutions, this is a way of, I think from our mission is to fund and create value from the indigenous communities themselves. And then that bubbles up and creates value for everyone in the ecosystem. So I just, yeah, a couple notes there, as well as from just the governance and open source aspect of the health of the ecosystem itself. This was, I think, the most effective way to just get buy-in from everyone and see, hey, do these categories matter to everyone? Is this an area of these areas where we all kind of feel like there needs to be more focus, or there could be maybe different perspectives applied to creating more focus here? Right now, Celo is an incredible technology, an incredible network, and I think it thrives when there's a diversity of perspectives coming with the resources to create change.
Thank you, Jarrell. Does anyone have any more questions about the 4 different categories? Let me see if there's anyone had questions in the chat. So for Milar,
I saw in the chat, it looks like Milar had something that she wanted to say about Brazil.
Okay, let me read it out loud. I would like to add a brief contribution, Brazil, if possible, at any given point, just to add support to the impact I believe this could do in the emerging community. Yeah, so one of the cool, interesting things about Brazil, if you look at it from a Valor perspective, is that Brazil is the biggest market for Valor in terms of activation and usage, right? So it makes sense that to even grow that even larger by having leaders in the community in Brazil, in the crypto community in Brazil, and being able to support them, but rather than like say, C Lab or like Dabrel, which is me and Jarrell, looking at individual project and determining what makes sense, what not, rather having the folks in Brazil as an example to using a small DAO, like a DAO specifically for Brazil, voting on what mattered for the Brazilian crypto community and how would that either facilitate better payment solutions in Brazil, if that is what the core aspect of it is, or like, education initiative, developer initiative within that realm and stuff. And I hope that answered the question, Milar.
Yeah, it's amazing. The full contribution here, I think, is just like I wanted to give you some data on how this like specific targets they could, for instance, be easily achieved in Brazil. I think that none of you here know, but Brazil has grown 800% in the last 4 years in startup investments. 800%. It's $5 billion investment in startup companies only in the first 6 months of 2021. There are several reasons like for that, but as we're talking about like how to hack a new emerging ecosystem and like the initiative, so like if opportunity is given and some barriers they are lowered, for instance, like the language barrier, as it was said here, so nicely done, and an intersection and interaction with universities, I think the same like eager and the same drive is going to come like towards crypto and also towards Celo. And the reason for that is what's going on here. The reason for all of this investment is because Brazil is leading the unicorn race in Latin America. Some of the next unicorns, they are already part of Celo ecosystem in Brazil, the ones that we think they will be. But we need to go like even one step down. So this decentralized way of doing things, I think is going to be awesome, especially if connected to universities. So that was my 2 cents for this, and to say that at least for me, who am an athlete for Brazil, has lived here almost my entire life, this seems very appropriate.
Yeah, I actually want to add a little something to that. Milar, thank you, and you really triggered something that I remembered. Actually, we had a conversation with Sep around this as well, which was like, how do you, one of the things I really loved about Chainlink, and there's very few things I really love about Chainlink, was that they took a bunch of money and they actually had an idea and they funded academic cohorts, the best Oracle designers in the world, and they gave them $10 million and said, hey, here's the idea we've had, here's the idea we've sold people, can you like make this work? And then genuinely they did, and they said, we aren't going to be the Silicon Valley big brains that are going to make this work. We need to actually go to these academic resources and give them money and funding and create the engine that we're trying to make. And one of the things I think would be awesome, and one of the things I'm hoping to do, is we are already looking at all these different markets for stable coins and who's ready to actually create a lot of volume with a new stablecoin. For instance, like the C Real, I know is something that everyone's interested in, and then personally for me, I think the C Naira would be huge, and the Liquid Star guys are interested in the C Naira. And when you look at that, it's like, okay, but what do we have in place to actually fund academic research on stablecoins, especially algorithmic stablecoins? It's a very tumultuous and contested idea in the space, and there's very few examples of an algorithmic stablecoin actually working in the wild, especially with high volume transactions. And that's an area where we talk about like universities. I think it'd be valuable to the whole ecosystem if we were actively funding cohorts to do research into algorithmic stablecoins from an economics perspective, but also from an emerging markets perspective. Like, what needs to happen to create an algorithmic stablecoin in Nigeria? Does it need to be actually pegged to the naira, or like what the Liquid Star guys are looking to hopefully do is like, can you peg a C naira to the price of electricity in that region? Is that a more valuable metric? And so these are types of things that with focus can actually be funded and created and bring value to the whole ecosystem.
Sweet. And yeah, thank you for that extra context, Joel. And like overall, like what Mila was talking about, what Joel was talking about, like Brazil, Nigeria, these are all models that if they prove successful, in the sense that you're generating more activity on a local level, and you can replicate that in a lot of emerging markets. So these are like, you know, what we're interested in to begin with, but there's a lot of ways to even scale those down in the future and, you know, expand it to other developer, you know, other nations and emerging markets and stuff. Is there any more questions on the category, or does everyone feel comfortable enough for us to move forward? Okay, I'll kick it off by continuing the proposal. So the multisig right now is 5 out of 9 multisig controlled by the following individual. So before we go over them, one of the folks on the multisig, we haven't added them yet. We're just getting feedback from, we're just waiting for feedback from them if they're comfortable being public or anon, but they're like a very strong cryptographer in the Ethereum space
and
working on their own startup right now. So that's like one thing.
They're comfortable being public. Had a meeting yesterday, so we can make that announcement.
Awesome. So, okay, I'll update the proposal by adding Tux. So Tux is from New, formerly from New Cipher. They're working on a new startup right now. It hasn't been revealed yet. They're like an amazing cryptographer, and we would be happy to have them as well on the multisig. So currently the multisig has me, Jarrell, and Eric from C Labs. We're the developer relations team at C Labs, and we have Gab Micheletti from Prosper DAO, Meta from Variant Fund, and Sheet 256. If anyone following Sheet 256, Meta's the co-founder. Then we have the amazing Maya Zahavi, who's like a leader in the crypto space, but at least from like an analysis point of view of what's happening in like crypto and stuff. Elizabeth Barnes, unfortunately, she couldn't make it to the call today. She was in New York, but she's, I believe, traveling right now back home from Figment. Elizabeth is also on the governance working group and also on Figment, as part of Figment, working on governance, research, and community focused stuff. Cassidy Daly from Centrifuge focuses on tokenomics and is one of the earlier crypto OGs working in this space. Moving on to the budget. So the budget that we're requesting from the on-chain governance community fund is 3 million Celo. Because of that amount, the proposal will also have a quarter and midpoint check-in after the percentage of the treasury has been allocated. Where, you know, at a quarter midpoint, we can solicit feedback from folks on how do they feel about like what we funded so far from the treasury, and at the quarter checkpoint, whether to continue forward and stuff. And the same thing will be repeated at the midpoint check-in. Midpoint, here's what we funded so far. Is it moving in the direction the community feels it's valuable for Celo? And if so, can we continue moving on beyond the midpoint? The other thing that we're thinking about is we really like this CCF, which I believe right now is called the CCF1. Deepak, correct me if I'm wrong. basically the setup that the CCF1 is doing is basically, it's basically a multisig that is allowed a specific allocation from the on-chain governance fund. But the allocation does not leave the on-chain community fund, but the CCF1 multisig had a spend limit up to that amount that they agreed on. And that's like an interesting thing that we really want to follow as well, basically, so that the 3 million seller that we're requesting is not really leaving the on-chain community fund, but our multisig is allowed a spend limit up to that amount. And the other thing we want to do is we want to have an open call for ideas from the community twice per year, where the community, can submit ideas for the tech we can target. Now, this is a way for us to solicit ideas because we don't have all the answers, but we have all the experience that we generated each individually and collectively within the space over the several years that we know where to target. But obviously, there's always new ideas and stuff on what we can target, and that it will give the community an opportunity to submit ideas on what we should target and stuff. So for the compensation, we proposed the equivalent of $100 in CUSD payable within a cap of 30 hours per week. But this is not for each multisig person. This is for the entire multisig. So we'll go over the reason for that. First, because this is a community-focused effort, we don't want to feel like we want to extract money from the community for this, but at the same time, if it goes up to the 30 hours, we can split whatever from that up to that cap at $100, which is roughly 3,000 CUSD per week. That's split among the multisig people depending on their contribution. The second thing is we understand that there are different models for grants, a program that exists where you can fund a majority, like a spectrum of different proposals, from like small micro grants to like larger ones. Our focus is only going to be on large projects. We want to focus on large projects because that's where we feel like we need to be more aggressive on rather than small micro grants. With micro grants, there's better programs out there that can serve the Celo community. Like, let's say somebody's requesting 1,000 Celo for a specific project. There exist other structures out there like the Celo grant program or the CCF1 where they can definitely go there and apply for these kind of grants. But with us, because we want to focus on larger grants, that means it's going to take less overhead. And my personal experience has been mostly with larger projects in others blockchain project, like, clients. It's just like, you fund clients, using a dev shop, and that's just going to take minimal coordination from you unless they have questions about like specific technical question where you can connect the dots with the blockchain team and stuff. And that will minimize the overhead and time spent from our side on micromanaging all these small grants, and allows us just to like focus on the larger grants and the larger projects. And so that's what we think would be a very what we want to target. Let me stop right here, I think, because people might have some feedback and questions, and let me just give an opportunity for everyone to ask questions and give feedback.
Yeah, I had a few like clarifying questions and some thoughts here. One is, I think, in terms of like compensation, I'm okay, right? Like, I think what I was interested more was that you guys spend more hours, right? You're asking like almost like $15 million. And I feel that you guys should be spending, at least a few people within the team should either be like full-time or at least half-time and spending like more time on these. Even if there are like a fewer projects, oh my God, like there'll be like so much overhead and work that especially like now running like the community CCF1 for a while now, we ended up spending much more time than we initially expected. Some things around, like things like, okay, like how do we decide like OKRs with our teams that you fund, like what kind of contract you should do, and just figuring out the contract structure and then doing follow-ups, making sure that they're following all the OKRs that you like set up, right? So these things, especially like we're not even giving that big a grant, right? Like the max we've given so far is like 100K. And even with this, we've had to do like so much work. And yeah, that is like I'm in support of what you guys are doing. I'm 100% like behind you guys, would love to help you in any way I can. But I do feel that there is like uncertainty around like how much time and effort is required. And like, I would like to see a little more rather than like, capping the hours, right? So that is like my biggest concern here.
I think,
yeah,
if I could just like kind of expand on that. Something that I've definitely noticed is I feel is like, especially with the open nature of crypto, I'm sort of always working. Like I'm going to meetups on the weekends. I have dinners that like, just dinner groups with friends like Leighton or Tarun, and it's like we're always talking about these sorts of things. And one of the best, I think, the biggest draws for me for this project is, okay, well, there's being able to talk about change, and then there's being able to actually like instigate change from those conversations. And so while 30 hours is kind of what's written here, I think that's 30 hours to create that equivalent of the compensation equivalent for like what is just like fair for the community. However, there's just different avenues for funding things that come up when you're like, oh, this, like for instance, the conversation I had with Seb from Zapper was around like, okay, what would you like to see? Are you guys interested in building a mobile app? Oh, you are interested in building a mobile app. Oh, you just don't have the time and the bandwidth for it. Well, what if I helped you get the time and the bandwidth for that through like funding some development for you? And it was very good conversation. And I was able to have that conversation because of the ideas, the ability to potentially utilize this fund for that development. So I think combined, especially how much I see Yaz, myself, Gabrielle, and others always talking about these things, there's active documented hours, and then there's, I think, a more abstract amount of time spent doing these sorts of deals and deal flow.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and to further add on that is my experience before Celo had only been larger projects, like funding larger project with a smaller team and stuff. And it didn't really take as much time because we were focused on specific project that we wanted to see in the ecosystem. And with that, like, we didn't really like understand the need to over define things with OKRs and stuff, but and like what you want to see, how do you want to create the proposal and stuff. But my favorite modus operandi is to be very lean on that kind of stuff, in the sense that if I'm talking to a dev shop or like let's say TrainSafe, the best way to talk to TrainSafe is just tell them, send me a statement of work. And they, like, historically they've delivered on everything, like in every other project and stuff, and we trust them because they have like an established name and stuff. We don't want to create our own processes over, here's can you please fill out this according to this application according to the way that we want you to fill it out, and what you think is going to happen and stuff. StreamSafe for client development has always knows what's best and how to build things, because client development is so super hard, right? And it's hard to like define things ahead of time and expecting people to target it. The best proof of work there is to see the contribution of the code going online on GitHub and stuff, and let's see how things are tested. But that is one example. On the other thing, on like the limited 30-hour cap, I think it's a good feedback. I think this is what we're comfortable with to begin with, because our interest has been more on a community aligned initiative. We're open. We had the suggestion about having somebody, hiring somebody full time. I'm in fact meeting with a couple of people today to see what they like, if there's any potential there for the long term, right? But we don't think it's because we want to go a bit more aggressively on the funding. We don't think it might be the best move for the initial setup, right? Because, and that's why, like, we wanted to do something like that where we can at least target the first few projects that we can target, and see how those go. And then from that, we can, actually establish more of a structure and stuff. We also got feedback, like we were also like gonna be working with a really amazing law firm that set up the Compound and Uniswap grant programs for them. And this law firm is going to be the one that going to give us a very flexible structure that is very compliant with the US laws and stuff, but allows us to actually be able to do grant for open source, for emerging markets, for radical experimentations and stuff. So that way we can minimize all that overhead and just be lean as fast as possible. But obviously, there, we did mention before we have checkpoints we want to hit. So that would be a great point to bring up in a checkpoint, whether we would like after we do that initial spending, whether it makes sense to have somebody more full-time and stuff. And that's why we're also like, meeting with folks that, we think would be amazing to run this program as a full-time person on the operation logistics side, on the nonprofit side, etc. And I hope this clarifies some of your first question.
Yeah,
that's good feedback, Deepak. I'm open to it. We just didn't want it to be like we're trying to extract value from the fund.
Yeah, it's definitely.
So you guys are like well-known people in the community, right? And I don't think we think that you're extracting value, right? I'm thinking the opposite, right? So I think you should have at least a little more flexibility, right? So that, as you said, you don't know what is going to happen. Just a little more flexibility. Then you're beholden to this, right? If you put that cap, then you'll have to convince the community to change it afterwards.
Yeah. So that is really good feedback. Maybe we can potentially start off with a 30, and on the midpoint, like would be the option of like maybe modifying or hire somebody full time after initial checkpoint and stuff, and we can add that to the proposal if that would be beneficial and stuff. Cool. I'm gonna write a note to add it. I'm also, while I make a note to add it, I'll give an opportunity for anyone else to ask any questions.
I have a question, like less on like the proposal itself, but like how could the community, assuming it passes, like how could the broader community help support the fund, or what kind of like interactions are you imagining so that we can, as kind of Jarrell said, like we're all doing this work all the time, and so. Yeah, I would just love for you to kind of make a request of us.
I think I would love to take this one. I think in the grand scheme of the ecosystem, there's a lot of different ways of deploying capital, and some ways are for specific ends and means, and using certain means to create specific ends. And one of those, and sometimes that requires like more friction in the funding process, as you vet good builders, as you vet regional actors and participants. And so you want to have like a really active maybe process that sometimes leads to more friction. And that is something that does exist on the ecosystem currently, and that's not bad that exists. However, I think for as far as a template for the community, like there also needs to be desperately like an arm that is maybe less friction. And there's this idea, like if you look at, just to use like I guess an example of another industry, you look at publishing and you look at really high quality publishers, and they know they have a good author. They aren't sure if that the next book's going to sell, but they know it's a good author. So they say, hey, we're going to give you an upfront advance, and we're hoping to see great work out of you. Like for instance, as Yas brought up, ChainSafe, and like they do great work, and just like distributing capital quickly. I think if the community knows that this arm exists, and they're like, okay, cool, I know these are good vetted builders. I know that the multi-sig participants know who these are, and I can just create that bridge of communication. Like, hey, these guys need some funds. They want to build this, and I think it would be beneficial to the ecosystem. This arm exists for the community. So this arm exists as a fast deploying capital avenue. And I think that's super powerful that there are those different options. And maybe you want to go through a different process that's more friction because you just come across someone in a region who you don't know is a vetted builder. And so you go through maybe the grants process or something else like Celo can. But you're talking to ChainSafe, you're talking to like the Zapper guys, you're talking to people who are like really established builders from the ecosystems that are legacy layer ones. You're like, okay, no, this is a full steam ahead, let's go type project. I could go to the CET and get this in front of them and create some discourse around this. And then furthermore, I mean, like, yeah, when it comes to the regional stuff, right now, C Labs has been super awesome about creating like eco leads, right? Eco leads, like Milar interacts with a lot of people in Brazil, and then we have folks like Umar in Uganda, and I've been helping like a lot of the African eco leads get like education programs and resources going, but that's only so much that can be done from a centralized team like C Labs, and there needs to be the ability to kickstart these DAOs to create educational resources. Whether it's just dev tooling shops, like how to get on board into Celo, whether it's like creating like Gitcoin campaigns, those types of stuff. They just need to be, I think, empowered to have a different avenue as well, where they're like, hey, I know that these folks have, I know these folks, I know they've been doing a lot with my local community in the past, and I now know that they have some capital to distribute. Let's see if I can also go to them to pass some stuff quickly. I just think really it's about iteration, like radical iteration and rapid iteration and focus. I don't know if that answered or brought up more questions. Feel free to ask them.
All right. Just because we got like 14 minutes left, what about we continue going over the proposal, then we take it off to final Q&A and stuff to consider out of consideration for time, and we can continue on the conversation in Q&A. So yeah, so one of the things that we want to do within the first 90 days is we want to at least reach out to 5 projects from the categories listed in the appendix. We're going to brush over the appendix soon, and reach out to 5 of them, communicate. Actually, you know, if you hear, you know, what Joel was saying, what I was saying, like we already reached out to them, a few of them, and they were very interested, and they have like potential to work together. But like within the 5 category, 5 different projects, and hopefully within the first 90 days, what we want to do is fund at least 1 project from each high level category. Ideally, like target 5 big projects. So if it's a new blockchain client, kick off 2 different DAOs on a country, like 2 different country DAOs in Brazil and in Nigeria, and work with like a few different radical experimentation proposals that Joel was talking about, and all the other like another initiative within the the crypto savvy community category. So that is something we want to do within the first 90 days. And that's why we want to go for the most flexible model, including within our the legal team that we want to represent us, so that we can establish a quicker, more flexible structure for allocating funds. At the same time, work with established people that we know in the ecosystem, like in the entire blockchain ecosystem, like ChainSafe. And instead of having like a specific set of requirements of what we want to see, just asking for a statement of work. They're really good at submitting a statement of work and what they do, because they're engineers. They're really good at building things from a core level and stuff. And yeah, so some of the marketing challenge. So initially when I joined Celo, like this is my personal take on this, is some of the marketing stuff we use when we advertise ourselves to the world is like, hey, we're EVM compatible. For folks who don't know what the EVM stands for, the EVM stands for the Ethereum Virtual Machine. Basically, this is the computer that allows for smart contracts to be created and executed. So Celo forked the guest client from Ethereum in order to, and it added a lot of cutting edge technology like Flumo, the foreign identity system, governance, and proof of stake. But the EVM itself needs a lot of love, because that technology was not built by Celo, but we benefit a lot from that technology from Solidity. And there's a lot we can do to actually push that technology forward, because my personal belief, and a lot of Ethereum would believe that as well, is the EVM is the current smart contract standard in all crypto. So anytime you hear that Near or Solana are building an EVM compatible bridge, it just further reiterates that the EVM is the standard. And that is just one example, obviously. The other thing is, in order to further decentralize things, like, having more boots on the ground engagement in emerging markets is important, but at the same time, not dictating what works, what doesn't work in those regions, but giving them the autonomy to decide that for themselves. Like, I don't know a lot about Nigeria or Brazil on a local level, but the locals who are crypto savvy know a lot more about that. And they should be able to decide that on their own and stuff. And would, at the same time, like having more like crypto savvy folks on Celo, the crypto savvy, like the crypto community is what's gonna help uh, create the most strongest foundation for Celo. Because that foundation would last through no matter the market cycle. Because it's a core community that is really aligned with the mission of Celo, no, regardless of what's happening on a market level and stuff. And that we have to like support and protect longer. Um, some of the risk is like, sometimes people think about sponsorship as a grant, as a pay to play. Um, and we want to minimize that by also being more active in support. Like we mentioned EIP support. So EIP support is not like us throwing money at Ethereum. Ethereum has plenty of money. It doesn't need that much money. But Ethereum and the foundation, the Ethereum Foundation, are not necessarily always attentive to all the little, um, weaknesses in their ecosystem that need further support. And those um, uh, components are super important to Celo. Like anything that happened to the Geth team or the Geth software impacts Celo right away. And so there's a lot of things that we need to do there just to like improve that.
To give a little bit of context to the regional stuff, I think, I think once again, bringing it back to the diversity of this multi-sig, we all have strengths and in different areas. And that's something that is going to be a wicked powerful combination. For example, when it comes to like, we talk about these regional areas like Lagos, which is just, I don't know how many like Nigerians y'all have like worked with, but they are harder workers than all of us. And that, like, for instance, I threw and organized the ETH Lagos hackathon that happened at the beginning of COVID. And there was a lot of challenges because then it stopped being an in-person hackathon and started being virtual, but there were still 350 developers that showed up. And there were specific challenges that they were trying to attack. And one of the issues that we had when organizing that was the funding from the Ethereum Foundation, and having this like, saying one thing about how they really want to empower this community, but also refusing to send money to a Nigerian bank account, and to the point where like the nonprofits that were coming out of Germany that were working with us were actually like embarrassed. They were like, who are these crypto people that don't even want to like send money to these populations that they supposedly want to bolster and help? And it created this like bad blood feeling. But the projects that came out of that hackathon actually were incredible, and some of them were even picked up by the regional government in Lagos. And so even with like scraps, they created real impressive like technologies and change. And so knowing those regions, knowing the folks on the ground that are actual builders, and just knowing what they need, is something that Ethereum doesn't have, Solana doesn't have, Avalanche doesn't have. And so as Celo is a very global community, there's aspects of that are actually huge, huge benefits to us if we focus and we leverage them correctly for the benefit of like the entire ecosystem and seeing what happens.
Yeah. We're just gonna brush over the last bit. So can you scroll down a bit, Will? So just to the beginning of the appendix. So these are links for useful resources in order to see what other communities are doing and what other protocols are doing on that kind of level. We also have a bio of the multi-signers. This is just Twitter link. We can add more bios, like information later. And Cassidy and Tux are not on there yet. I need to update the CGP with their links. And when we look at the target area for focus, the top, I think the top the top five all go under one category, which is the open source side, which is like for the blockchain, we talk about different clients, cryptography, like David Campbell is here from Zcash, very interested in zero knowledge research and threshold cryptography research, mobile first, like decentralized identity, attestation incentive, mobile SDKs. And if you go even further down to the community side, like what we want to do with the community, all of that was like addressed in the scope of the different categories on like in the ecosystem side, but like this gives you more of an idea of what we specifically want to target. One interesting one is open source governance programs and standards body. For example, we have to be at every Rust conference and potentially even like supporting Rust on a programming level, because that allowed more Rust developers to funnel back to Celo. And we do a lot of things in Rust, like optics, Blumo, everything requires Rust, and Rust developers are, with crypto knowledge, are much scarce and stuff. So yeah, and the other thing is definitely marketing. So we do want to market the on-chain governance fund, which is not the treasury, it's the separate fund. So part of that, thing we want to do is market it in a way where if people want to also apply to submit a governance proposal for an allocation of the on-chain governance fund, we want to actually spread that word out and stuff with marketing. And for marketing folks who can help out with that on a part-time basis, I spoke to a few people who really would be really suitable for that and very good at that. So with that, I want to stop and take any questions and provide feedback and stuff. So let me check chat and feel free to jump in and ask a question if you have any.
Awesome. Yeah, Ronan had a few good comments in the chat. Ronan, do you want to expand on those? And before you do, I'll just jump in and say, quick time check, we've got about 4 minutes left.
No, thanks, Will. That's really kind of the core points I want to make. I just think they probably are the strengths. The optics seems really interesting. There seems to be a lot of liquidity coming in there, which that was great. But yeah, more stables like West African franc. I don't know where that is, but that sounds great. The Brazilian currency sounds great. And then, yeah, more boots on the ground projects. Like I was trying to read more about some of the Valora projects and stuff, but there just really aren't enough of them out there. I'm just repeating myself now anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. Anybody else have questions or comments?
Yeah, just to jump in here a little bit, I don't have a question, but just want to expand on some of the good points made and speak a little bit too, as well, to some of the motivations, again, for the proposal in general, and then also for like personal participation in the Multisig group. So 2 really good points that were brought up that I want to just reiterate here, at least in my view, were kind of being interest on the community aligned effort. And the point about rapid iteration again too. So there's 3 motivations here that I see and just kind of want to also communicate. One is on the decentralization overall of the ecosystem, and this is particularly related to the community funds deployments and distributions. So I think we've covered this a little bit too, but here what I'm kind of talking about, is like diversifying all of the support vehicles and mechanisms and sources that we have across the board on a community level, so that there is more like further decentralization too, of just like funding sources for folks and groups and projects, so on. And also contributing, again, this was brought up in some comments on the forum, to the awareness overall of the on-chain commons pool that we have. So that would be the first thing. Second thing is, again, just reiterating the fact that we want to focus here on open source, community-based, like public goods and public benefit projects, because I think that's what we think is the best use, in fact, of like a public community treasury. And so again, we want to like really mobilize and energize advocacy and use these resources towards that particular goal. And the third one, I brought this up in conversation recently too, with some folks like involved in governance, like in the crypto space at some of the events here in New York this week. But the third is on the velocity. And this is in the spirit of similar efforts and with advisorship from our friends around the crypto space, like UNA grants and compound grants and Aave grants, et cetera. And it's the velocity which the disbursements happen. So we want like the velocity of funds and related to asset distributions to be translated overall into like velocity of projects, velocity of code, both technological and social, because that's kind of one of the inherent values of free and open source software in itself, and also something that we're confident in our own ability to steward, with the experience that we have and we can all bring. So high velocity from signal to funding and then back again to community. So yeah, I just overall want to say thank you all to everyone here on this call, to the conversation and comments and involvement and feedback has been really great. And for me, there's just a lot of excitement around the cool things that we can co-support together too, from around and across the crypto space with our proposal.
Awesome. Those are really good points. We are at 10 o'clock, or I guess 1 o'clock Eastern right now, so we'll end the meeting here. But yeah, I want to take it back to you to give next steps here, and then we can sign off.
Thanks, Will. So for next steps, please, if you have more feedback and you didn't feel like you got an opportunity to talk about it within the specific call, we have the forum post, which has a lot of discussions about it and stuff. So check out the forum post. It's also, if you look at the CGP itself, the forum post is linked there, but here it is. Click on it. Feel free to provide feedback and stuff. And for that, and after that, we'll continue. We'll update the proposal with like feedback from Deepak about the cab and maybe being a bit more flexible after a certain point, and all the other stuff that we receive feedback on, and then we'll go over next step. And thank you all so much for this great call. It was great to see everyone. I'm glad everyone's like excited about this, and yeah, thank you all.